Hi, my name is Sachin Kotwani and I'm a product manager at Google. Today I'm going to be showing you how to get started using Google APIs in App Engine using Java. APIs allow you to programmatically access resources exposed by services within your application. At Google, that would mean APIs to services such as Plus, Drive, Calendar. You can also stand your own service and access it to the same mechanism using cloud endpoints. So why don't we get started? Here's the agenda of what we will be covering. First, we will set up the programming environment. For this particular flow and example, we are going to be using Eclipse, but you can feel free to use any other IDE of your choice and the command line tools that we provide with the App Engine SDK. Next, we'll be creating a basic App Engine web app. Then we will use that web app to make a call to the Google Plus API. And last but not least, we'll be making an authenticated API call that will allow us to access data about a particular user that's using our application. So let's get started with Eclipse. You will need to go to eclipse.org/downloads and get the Java EE version of the IDE. Now, I have already done that and have it on my desktop. So once I expand the bundle that I download, I get this folder and I start up Eclipse. The first time you run it, you will get a welcome screen. You can click on the workbench icon and that will take you here. And one of the first things that we need to do in the environment before we get coding is install a few plugins. So I'm going to install first the Mercurial plugin. And that's a plugin that allows us to access public repositories, public or private repositories. In this case, I'm going to use it to download the samples that we're going to be using. So we'll go to Help, Eclipse Marketplace, and I'm going to type Mercurial, and I'm going to click Install. So it's going to ask me if this is what I want. I click Next, and I'm going to accept the terms there and click Finish. And once it's done, I'm going to click OK to this warning as well. Once it's done, it's going to ask me to restart the IDE. I'm going to say yes. In your case, you might want to hold off and click no because you will need to install a couple more plugins. I've already done that piece so we can save some time, but I'm going to show you how to get to them. So once Eclipse restarts, I'm going to go back to the marketplace and show you what other plugins you will need. Okay, so you would go to Eclipse Marketplace, and Maven is the next one that we need. So you type Maven, and Maven integration for Eclipse is the one that you'd want to install. I don't get an install button, I just get an update button that's grayed out because I have the latest version installed. So that would get you Maven. And if you type Google plugin for Eclipse, you will get the plugin that you need to create a basic web application to which you can add APIs and to deploy your application to App Engine. So again, for me, the button is grayed out, but you would click Install and you would be good to download the plugin and then restart the IDE. So now we have our environment set up. Let's see what's next. We want to create a basic web application. So let's go to that. I'm going to click on the icon for the Google plugin for Eclipse, and I'm going to say New Web Application Project, and I'm going to call it Plus Basic because we will be calling the Google Plus API. And I'm going to just enter an example package name. And we won't be using the Google Web Toolkit for this particular example, so I can uncheck that, and I click Finish. And I have my basic project generated for me. So I'm going to open the servlet, and you see it's very simple. The doGet method is what gets called, and it basically just displays the words hello world. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to test it out locally. So I'm going to do run as web application, and in the logging here, I'm just going to have to scroll up a little bit. It tells me where it's running, localhost 8888. So I'm going to go to the browser, localhost 8888. When the web application is created, it first puts a front end of an index of all the servlets available. So that's what we are seeing here, and that's just done for us automatically. And this is a servlet that I created. So I'm going to click on it and it just says hello world. So that was pretty simple. But of course, this is running locally and it doesn't do us much good to have something running just on our laptop on our own machine. So how do we get this to the cloud? Let's go back to the slides. We want to create a cloud project and then deploy the application to it. So I'm going to copy this URL and I'm going to open the Cloud Console where I'm going to create a project. So I'm going to call it My Plus API Demo, and I'm going to give it a prettier project ID than what was generated for me. So let's see, Sachin-API/demo. And let's give it a few seconds. Let's see if that name is available, and that's what we will be using. So just a few more seconds until all the components are provisioned, and there we go. Sachin-API-demo is our project. Let's go back here, and I'm just going to do a couple of things. First, I'm going to sign in to the IDE. This will allow me to then deploy the application to App Engine. So I'm going to click on that and sign in. Okay, and I'm going to allow permission to the Google plugin for Eclipse to access my account. And next, I am going to take the app ID that I created. I mean, it shows here and shows in a couple of other places, or you could just write it down. But I'm going to need that to enter it in the properties of my application. So I just did a right-click properties, expand the Google menu, and then where it says App Engine, there's a text field called Application ID. I'm just going to paste my application ID there and click OK. I'm going to also stop my local dev server because we don't need that at this point. And I'm going to deploy my application to App Engine. So right-click, Google, deploy to App Engine. I'm going to click deploy. At this point, the application is being compiled, bundled together, and deployed to App Engine. So let's give it a few seconds for that process to complete, and it tells us that the deployment has completed successfully. So what I need to do next is go to the URL for my application, which is going to be the project ID that we created, .appspot.com. So we get the same thing that we got locally, and I'm going to click on it, and it says, hello world. That's exactly what we were expecting, but now it's running in the cloud. So that's great. But a simple application that just shows some text is not a lot of fun. So let's get into some more interesting things. We're going to go back here, and we're going to work our way through to make an unauthenticated call to the Google Plus APIs. So first, we need to install the client libraries for my API. Those client libraries will allow our application to talk to the Google Plus API service. So I select my project, I click on the plugin, and I say Add Google APIs. And I'm going to scroll down until I find the one for Google Plus. That's the one that I want, and I'm going to click Finish. And it's going to take a few seconds to download all the libraries required to access the Google Plus API. Now, APIs are RESTful, so you could actually do a manual REST call through an HTTP URL and access the resources that way, and you would get a JSON formatted response. But the client libraries make that entire process much easier for you. Let's see how that works. So once I'm done with that, you see that it says Google Plus API here, and if I expand that, it's all the jar files that are required for us to get the API calls working. So what do I do next? You have to add just a few lines to access the API and make a call to the API. Now, instead of typing them here, I have a very simple example that I have downloaded and that we are going to be working with. So I'm just going to open it and paste it here. The only thing that I need to change is the package name because it should match the one that I created. So that's saved. So here's my sample. And let me explain a little bit what's going on here. So you remember in the previous example, we had a do get that had a hello world. Very simple, just 2 lines, output hello world. Here, the most interesting part happens in these 2 lines. We are obtaining a plus object. A plus object allows our application to interact with the Google Plus API. It builds an object given an HTTP transport and a JSON factory objects. Those take care of the networking and the serialization and deserialization of the JSON message that gets transmitted between our application and the backend. So once I have that plus object, here's what I do. The plus object has a resource called activities. Within that activity, I'm going to do a search for anything that contains the word Google, and I'm going to execute that statement. I will get an activity feed back. The activity feed contains items. I'm going to put those items in a list of activities, and then right here, I'm going to iterate in a for loop through each of those activities, get the title, and print it on the screen. Now, you must have noticed one of the parameters here is the API key, and the API key is blank. This key identifies our application with the backend. It basically lets the backend know who the application is and whether it's authorized to access the API. So we need to obtain that. So let's get back to the slides. And it says that the next step is to go to the API's console and activate the API and obtain the server-side key. So I'm going to copy this URL. And here, I'm going to select my plus API demo, which is the one we are working on. And I'm going to turn on the Google Plus API because that's the one we want to use. Google Plus API, turn it on. And now I'm going to go to the API access that we were talking about. So there's a API key that was created for us. I'm just going to create a new one just to show you how it's done. So we want a new server key. We could filter the request from certain IP addresses. We don't want to do that at this point, so I'm just going to create a key. And I'm just going to copy this key and paste it here. So now at this point, I could either test this locally first and then deploy it. You probably want to test locally first, but I'm just going to deploy it since it's a simple example. And this should be very similar to what we did before. The example gets compiled, it gets packaged, it gets uploaded to App Engine, and then it starts serving. So let's give it a few seconds. It's deploying the new version, and it says that the new version is ready. The deployment is complete and it's ready to serve. So let's go back to the URL, to the root URL of our application. Again, we get the same index of all the servlets available. But this time, when I click on it, let's see what happens. Few seconds because this is the first time we are running the application. And here you go. Instead of seeing hello world, you actually see a list of activities that come from the Google Plus stream that match the word Google. So we are done with that part. And we are done with making an unauthenticated call to the Google Plus API. Okay, so accessing the public stream is interesting, and you're accessing public data, but most applications really thrive when they interact with a particular user's data after they authorize the application to access it, of course. So that's what we're going to do next. We're going to make an authenticated call to the API. There are many ways of doing this. You can go through the OAuth process somewhat manually, but for this example, we are going to download a very simple sample that has 2 servlets in it that takes care of the authentication piece for the most part, so we don't have to worry about the low-level detail. So before I download that sample application, let me explain what the servlets contained in it are going to do. There are going to be 2 servlets. One is the plus sample servlet, which is our entry point. First, it's going to check if credentials exist for a particular user. So if a particular user accesses the application and authorizes it to access its resources, the application can then, oops, I got an update notification. I'm going to go back. It's going to ask the user if the credentials exist, and the first time that I've gone through that process, it's going to go through the authorization servers, but if not, it's just going to make the API call. So let's assume that's the first time accessing that application. The credentials are not going to exist, so I'm going to be redirected to the Google Auth servers, and at that point, I'm going to say, yes, I want to allow this application to access my resources, and once that's done, the servers are going to redirect me to the second part, the callback of my application, that's going to take the authorization code that I obtained from here, and it's going to turn that authorization code into a refresh token and an access token. Now think of the access token as a valet key that's needed to access data through the API call. In the old days, people used to build applications that would ask the users to enter the username and password to their applications, to their accounts. And that's actually a pretty bad thing. Once you have the username and password for a particular user, you can do anything to their account. With OAuth 2 flows and OAuth 2 keys and access tokens, you're only granting a particular application access to just portion of your data. Think of it as a valet key. It's just very limited use. Okay, so how do we get started with this? First, we're going to get the sample source code from this repository. So I'm going to copy the URL. I'm going to go back to the IDE and close this. And if you remember, we installed a plugin for Mercurial. So I'm going to use that to clone an existing repository. I'm going to paste that URL. And in my case, I've already downloaded it before, so that it doesn't like that I'm using that name. So I'm just going to rename the directory and download it somewhere else. So this is basically accessing a repository of public samples that we have for using APIs in general, and it's obtaining all those samples from the repository. So while it does that, while it downloads them, I'm going to go back to the slides and see what the next steps are. So just like we obtained an API key in our previous example to access the API, now we need to create client credentials. The difference between this and the API key is that it allows my application to go through the OAuth 2 flow that's going to be required to access a particular user's data. So let's go and do that. I'm going to go back to the API's console, and there's already a client ID here. I'm just going to delete it to show you how to create one from scratch if one wasn't there. So I'm going to create an Auth 2 client ID, and I'm going to call it my API demo. And I'm going to put the homepage URL here. And next, I'm going to say it's a web application, and I'm going to type the URL for it. So this is the same thing. In my case, it's HTTP. And you see that there's a redirect URI. In the previous flow, when I was explaining the callback mechanism, the authorization servers are going to send the user back to my application at this URL. And that's where we're going to take the authorization code and convert it into a refresh token and an access token. So let's click on create and create that client ID. So I'm going to just download this file. And that didn't work. I'm going to try that one more time. I'm going to download this file. There we go. Client secrets.json has been downloaded. And in the meantime, looks like the repository here started downloading. It asked me to pick a branch. I'm going to just pick the default one. And I don't need all these samples right now, although it would be good to download them and explore all of them. I just want to open the one that we are looking at in this example. So it's plus preview app engine sample. So I'm just going to click finish. And one of the first things that I'm going to do is I have to make a few changes to it. So I'm going to again go to the properties and paste the application ID that we need. And that is going to be right here in the URL. And that's going to be necessary because that's where application is going to deploy to. So I'm going to paste it here. Okay, it's giving me an error because one of the first things I should do before I do that is to build my Maven project. So let me do that first instead. I'm going to do run as Maven install. And this is downloading all the dependencies for my project. So if you remember in the first example that we did, I actually went to Plus Basic and I clicked on the Google plugin for Eclipse and I downloaded the APIs. That's one way of doing it. This particular example is a Maven project. In a Maven project, you have a POM file that indicates all the dependencies for your project. One of the dependencies already indicated there is the Google Plus Client library. So we don't have to go manually to download it. As part of the build process and the install process of the project, it gets done for us. So I did that, and I'm going to now go to Maven and update the project so it refreshes everything. And let me see if now it lets me, there we go. Now it lets me edit the application ID. Probably the app engine-web XML file wasn't there before because I hadn't done the build. So that's done. I've also downloaded the client secrets.json file. So I'm going to replace the dummy one in here with the one that I actually created for my application. So I'm going to paste it there, and I'm going to allow it to overwrite the existing file. And now, before we run this, let's explore the two servlets we were talking about. Now, if you notice, these are the two servlets. There's also the Plus Basic servlet. That's the one that we did in the first example. If you just want to download it and play with it, it's going to be available as part of this directory. So back to our Plus Sample servlet. It's going to look similar in some pieces, so you probably recognize this from our previous example. You're building a Plus object to interact with the API, and then you're going to use that object to access the people resource, and you're going to get me, which is my profile. So that's a profile person object right there, which is my profile. And from that profile, I can get the image and the URL to the image to my profile. I can get the URL to my profile and the display name. So we're going to do all those things, and that's what we're going to show as part of our example. Before we do that, though, a lot of things are taken care of for you here. So the authorization flow and the credentials are required. So essentially, the credentials are required to access a particular user's data. You'll notice that the Plus object has the credential object here. In our previous example, this was null. Now we're going to pass data that identifies a particular user. When the servlet is first entered, it checks where the credential equals null. If the credential has been stored through some mechanism because of the user previously accessing the application, then we won't go to this flow. But the first time, of course, there are no credentials, so we are going to be redirected through the authorization flow, and we don't need to worry right now about the low-level details, but it's essentially what I had explained. You get redirected to Google servers, you authorize your application to access the data, or the user does, and you get redirected back to your application. So I just want to make a quick change here. I'm going to set my application name to my API demo. I'm going to save that, and I'm going to deploy it. Deploy to App Engine. Same thing we did before. Again, it's compiling, bundling, deploying. Let's give it a few seconds. Deployment completed successfully. So let's go back to the root URL of the application. Now here you see two examples, the basic one that we worked on before and the OAuth 2 example. So let's click on that and give it a few seconds to load for the first time. It usually doesn't take that long, but the first time you run an application, it starts up a new instance. And here's what's happening. So we want to allow access to my application. And there you go. I see I'm the user who authorized the application. So there's it's accessing Google Plus data about my account, and there's a picture, and if I click on it, it accesses my Google Plus profile. So we are pretty much done here with authenticated calls. So what's next? APIs Explorer is really a good place to learn about all the APIs that Google offers. It allows you to interact with them and not just see a listing of them, but you can actually fill out a form that allows you to enter the different parameters that you would send to the API when making a call and get a response back in JSON format. So that's an interesting place to explore the different APIs that we have. If you want to learn more about OAuth 2, you should go to this link and learn more about how the entire flow works. At the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that you can use this mechanism not only to access APIs that Google offers, but you can create your own API. And that's done through Cloud Endpoints. And you should, if you want to learn more about that, you should go to this URL. In the repository that we downloaded, there was a sample called Plus App Engine Sample. It is a more advanced example of what we did. It offers things such as error handling, and if you want to learn more advanced things that you can do with an example with API calls, you should look at that example. And if you have any questions, you can find us on Stack Overflow under the tags Google App Engine or Google APIs. Hope you enjoyed the presentation. Take care.